just come in from the apiary on our farm west of Dundee, where we have numerous beehives, and at present our hives are producing about 15,000 pounds of honey per year. And you must excuse me for using these cards, but I'm in my early 70s now, and it's hard to remember a great number of dates and people's names. In 1832 was when I first came through this beautiful valley. I was in the Army in General Winfield Scott's Army as a volunteer, and it was the Black Hawk War. And there were many men who volunteered for this, among whom some names you might recognize: Abraham Lincoln, Zachary Taylor, and Jefferson Davis. So I was in good company. Now I want to pause here for a moment and backtrack and tell you something about my parents. My father John was born in 1787 in Kentucky, and my mother Nancy was born in 1786 in Virginia. They were married in Indiana in 1806. They moved to McLean County, Illinois in 1828. They laid out Walnut Grove, which is now the town of Eureka. They helped establish Eureka College, and the Christian church was organized in their cabin. My father became its elder and preacher and was thereafter known as Elder John Oatmen. My parents were blessed with many, many children, 16 in all, 12 boys and 4 girls. The firstborn were America and Eliza. America married Thomas DeWeese, and Eliza married Thomas Shields. Elder John and his wife and children came north to the Illinois wilderness in 1835. My brother Hardin and I had a mercantile business in Washington, Illinois, and remained there until 1837. In 1836, the town was laid out for my father, his sons, and sons-in-law on the west side of the river. The east side was laid out at a later time. That same year, on June 15th, I married Lucinda Curtis Mowry, who was born in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1819, and came with her parents to Tazewell County, Illinois, after having lived some years in Canada. Having been born in 1811, I was 8 years my bride's senior, and she but 18 years of age when we married. Some years later, Lucy's parents, Pliny and Rhoda Mowry, moved to Dundee and spent the rest of their lives here. In 1837, my brother Hardin, Lucy, and I moved here where my parents had settled. Hardin and I brought some things from our store in Washington and opened a mercantile here. Lucy and I moved into an unfinished building on the main street, on the corner of Main Street and 4th, where later the Baptists built the large white church, which still stands. At first we had no windows nor doors, as we couldn't afford to buy them. So we took out a mortgage and were able to complete the building, and it became the Oatmen Tavern, a gathering place for many of the people in the community. This was not a typical tavern in that we did not serve spirits. Local churches held services in our meeting room. The first sermon preached in the settlement was done by Reverend Elmore, who came up from St. Charles. People traveling stayed overnight at the tavern. Our store across the road and the tavern made up the business district of the day. The store was the only one north of St. Charles at that time. At this time, the community had no name. Most of the men of the settlement had gathered at the tavern for a house raising. There was a drawing of lots to determine a name for the settlement. Alexander Gardner, a young Scotsman, won the honor and chose Dundee, as that was his hometown on the Firth of Tay, in Scotland. Water. Not long after our move here, I went to the bend in the river where lived a few Potawatomi Indians. There were 6 huts or wigwams and about 25 Indians remaining. The leader invited me to stay for a meal. I watched with interest as his wife prepared the food. A freshly killed sandhill crane, and in reality, a sandhill crane would be considerably a lot taller than it. But anyway, a freshly killed sandhill crane from which she pulled a few feathers, then placed the bird in a pot, which bubbled over the fire. I thanked them for the invitation, told of another engagement, and left the case. By the late 1830s, we townfolk recognized that we really needed a bridge across the river. Prior to that, we had forded the river when necessary. Subscriptions were collected from various residents. My father contributed $100 and I $25. The total came to $1,575, which was sufficient to build the bridge. And it was completed in 1839. Lucy, our children, 6 in all, Lucinda, Caroline, Edward, George, Alfred, and Henrietta, and I lived at the tavern for nearly 20 years, during which time I was involved in town activities such as postmaster for 9 years and as a justice of the peace. The post office was in our store. In 1857, we moved to the house of Lucy's parents at the southwest corner of Oregon Avenue and 2nd Street. We lived there while our house across the street was built and completed in 1858. In 1860, I traveled to Washington, D.C. to witness the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. I was not able to find a sleeping room and spent several nights sleeping in a public building using my boots as a pillow. When the war began in 1861, we held a farewell reception at the tavern for the Dundee boys who had volunteered. Upon learning of the death of President Lincoln, I was overcome with grief and sobbed at the loss. Again, in 1865, on the site of our tavern, a war concert was held when the survivors of the war came home. The tavern had been raised to make a place for the new Baptist church. In 1870, we set up a creamery on the west side where we produced cheese. Eventually, we moved it to the east side to Cheese Hill. My sons went on to create a total of 22 creameries in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. These enterprises, along with the bee business, kept me as busy as I wanted to be for the rest of my days.